Welcome to PC Games Nostalgia, where we talk about yesterday's PC games today. My name is Jimmy Wilhelmsson, and I'm going to be your host for the next 20 minutes or so. The game title we're going to probe into today is... Each time we bring a guest from the gaming industry to our digital studio here at PCGN. And today's honored guest star is Miss Elvira Björkman. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome, Miss Björkman. May I call you Elvira?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. For me being here.
Of course, it's an honor to us. You are the co-founder of Two Feathers Studio. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What is Two Feathers?
So Two Feathers is a music composer duo. We're two people. It's me and Nicholas. It's basically our artist name, I guess, a combined artist name, as we compose a lot of music for video games, basically.
Okay.
So that's the short explanation of that.
So you're specialized in gaming music, or do you do other musical works as well?
Well, I'm a game composer at day and a metal head on night, I suppose.
You're a metalhead.
So, yeah, definitely. So we have a small little project on the side. It's called Two Feathers Epoch, like a off branch.
Okay.
But it's our non-band band. It's still just us two, but it sounds like a band.
Because I heard somewhere you and your co-founder, Two Feathers co-founder Niklas, you met while playing in a metal band. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. I played the bass and he's playing the guitar.
What was or is the name of that band?
The name of that band was or is, I'm not sure. We're not part of that band anymore.
Okay.
It is Overworld.
Okay.
So
were you any good?
We were okay. I think it sounded really good at the at release on Spotify on the CD in the studio, but we could have played better on stage, I suppose.
Okay. But Elvira, your greatest claim to fame in the beginning of your career was composing music for Angry Birds 2 for Rovio. Isn't that right? Tell us a little about that. How did you get that job?
Oh, right. So it's Angry Birds 2, the game, obviously not the movie. I need to say that now because now there's a movie with the same name.
Oh, well, we're only dealing with games here, so I think it's kind of obvious to us.
Good. I had composed together with Nicholas for another game called Hammerwatch, and that was while I was studying game design at a school called Future Games in Stockholm.
Okay.
And then in that school, it was a trade school, so you had to have an internship, and I chose to have an internship as a sound designer rather than a game designer, because I thought that would be a good marriage between two worlds of like music and game design, well, sound design, woo.
Yeah.
And I got an internship at Rovio. I applied everywhere. Rovio was the only mobile, studio that I applied to because I didn't even play mobile games myself.
Did you tell them that?
Yeah, I told them, but I said I'm really open to see what this is, and the technical challenge with that is interesting.
Okay.
It's creative in its own way. So I got that internship. After a while, I just did a music piece actually for the prototype of the game, because it was going to be, before it was called Angry Birds 2, it was called Angry Birds Big Board Adventure or something like that. We called it short ABBA because we were a new Swedish studio of Rovio, so they had opened a Stockholm office since Rovio is in Finland, for those who doesn't know.
Of course, yeah.
And we were going to pitch our first game to Rovio because they need to greenlight it internally
Yeah.
first. And it had no music to it, and I felt that was really boring. So I just wrote something on my evenings, kind of made sound design for it, and then, sat there after everyone left and continued work, put it in. And after that, I got a call, and they said, like, from the head of audio, and he wanted me to make the rest of the music, and that was that.
So what you're saying is they didn't give you the assignment, you wrote some music on your own and then showed it to them and they said, wow, this is great, you got to write the rest.
Yeah.
Wow.
Basically.
That's an amazing story. So did you ever,
pretty cool.
what's the name, the original composer of Angry Birds is Ari Pulkkinen, I believe.
Yeah.
I once met him in a Nordic game in Malmö. He's a really nice guy. Did you ever meet him, or did you just compose everything on your own and skip the original, the music from the original game?
I composed everything on my own and skipped anything from the original, except for just flirting a little bit with the melody, that melody.
Yeah, that one.
It's in one of the songs. It's just flirting a little bit with it, but not on the nose. It's not just that melody, but it's like a little bit of a rearrangement and just having it in a part of the song, as a throw back to it in a sense, or saying hello to it.
Nice.
But then I met him after the fact, during, I can't remember actually where it was, but it was in Finland, and I was there, and I met him while we were out with the audio department there. We met it.
Right. And he was happy?
He was happy. The game wasn't released yet, so I have no idea if he ever heard the music, really. So I have no clue. But I met him at least.
Nice. So, you're here today. That's no coincidence that you are a music composer, and we're going to talk about a game we're feeling nostalgic about. Even though it's still around, the game we're going to talk about is Final Fantasy XIV. I have to say to the viewers, as I always do, I haven't played Final Fantasy XIV. I've seen it before this show, and I know, of course, what it's about. Everybody knows Final Fantasy, but not that particular game. So let me just start off with, why did you choose Final Fantasy XIV out of all games? Because it had a rather shaky history, am I right? It was around already in 2010, but something happened.
Yeah, so what happened, it's a pretty cool story in itself, of a failure turned into a success. And they released the game, but everyone hated on it, and it didn't go well, and everyone was complaining and giving feedback. It was a catastrophe.
And it's an MMORPG, right?
It's an MMO, yeah.
Massive multiplayer online role-playing game, that stands for.
Yeah, it's basically a Final Fantasy version of World of Warcraft,
Right.
So.
Was that the first one? I don't think it was. There was an MMO.
No, Final Fantasy XI is the first MMO.
Right.
But I never played that one. I've never been a big MMO player.
Okay.
And that's why I kind of chose this one, because it's the one who turned me into an MMO player, I suppose. I've only played single-player games all my life almost. So.
Why did it fail, the 2010 version? Do you have an opinion on that?
It failed because it wasn't very user-friendly, I think. It was lots of systems, and the user interfaces was just such a huge mess, and stuff you had to do, it was just very convoluted in a sense. You had to go through so many steps before just crafting. It was fun. The core was fun, but it was so much in the way of that fun.
Okay.
So that kind of removed the funness of it.
So whenever you have to bring up a menu or something, there are too many steps and whatever you want to make a...
Exactly.
Okay. What about
too many steps and stuff like that, and maybe the graphics didn't feel real up to date at that point, and so stuff like that. And it was just... The core was fantastic, but there was so much... it didn't feel polished enough.
Right.
Basically, like they had released it too early. That's how it felt like.
And that was released on Windows, right?
Yeah, it was released on PC, Windows.
which was
first, I think.
Which was
2010.
Yeah. Which was obvious because it was a MMORPG, but it wasn't maybe the platform that Square Enix, the company behind Final Fantasy games, maybe that wasn't their forte, making games for Windows. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But what about the music? You played the 2010 version also. Was the music any good, or I mean, since you're a composer yourself?
I didn't play much of the 2010 version.
Okay.
It was Realm Reborn that made me really start to like it, you know. So I don't have much opinions on the music from the 2010 version. However, my opinions on the 2013 version is that it's amazing. I think it's like it's fantastic, but I'm not sure how much they redid when it came to the music. Actually, if it was because I know that Uematsu did a lot of music for like it's called Before the Meteor,
right?
Basically, because they did. I can rewind there like a little bit, like but the cool thing they did with this like failure was that they scrapped everything. They turned down the servers. They said, okay, no more game. We're going to rework this. And 3 years later, they emerged with a new version. But the people who or did they turn down the service or something? I can't remember how they did that, actually. They did turn off something at least, but...
I think they closed down, yeah.
Yeah, they closed down, but before that point... before that point, they did this fantastic, like, cutscene where they had this huge meteor in-game coming down, just crashing everything, the whole world,
right.
In a sense. And when the Realm Reborn starts, they call that event the Calamity, and they started to evolve that story about that event. So they incorporated everything that happened from before into the new game, and I think that's amazing.
That's a really cool
idea,
thing. It's a way for the game designers, the developers, to say, okay, we're sorry, we apologize for this game. We're gonna make a new one for you. We're gonna make up for this. So, like as you said, in 2013, I think it was, Final Fantasy XIV was released again and called A Realm Reborn, as you said. Wow. And the guy you mentioned, for somebody who has not played a lot of Final Fantasy or Japanese game, who is this Uematsu you're talking about?
All right, yeah, Mr. Nobuo Uematsu. He's the composer that I think, for me and a lot of music composers of today, at least, has gotten their inspiration from to become music composers for games.
Yeah.
And he composed for the entire Final Fantasy series up until Final Fantasy X. And then he's been then he started his own freelance studio. I mean, after you've done the same series for a while, I think you want to do other stuff.
Of course.
But he still comes back as doing some small things now and then for Final Fantasy. But that period of the whole of the 90s Final Fantasy and the beginning of the 2000s Final Fantasy, he was the game composer. It felt like, if you didn't talk about like maybe Zelda or Super Mario and so on, but he's super famous for his music in games.
Of course, he really is. He's a legend. Even if you are not into Square Enix titles, like I'm not normally, the name. I have a good friend, Orvar Sävström, who you maybe also know. In Sweden, he arranges gaming music orchestras, and every time there is an Uematsu suite or whatever, you can see people crying or reacting in the audience. So it's very strong for a lot of people. So, but what is it about Final Fantasy XIV that made you choose this game to talk about today? What was the lure? What was the thing about it back in 2013?
The lure. Okay, so I think For me, the lure of that game. I'm obviously a big Final Fantasy fan.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, I felt like the usual Final Fantasy stuff, the aesthetic of Final Fantasy has always something I'm very drawn to. The world building itself, the lore, and the mystery of the character and the story. You could really play this game as a single player game if you want to.
Okay.
And for me, that haven't played much multiplayer games, or doesn't really like to. I don't really like to play games with other people in that sense. Like I like to do that sometimes, but generally for me, games are more like a book. Like it's me and my me time, and I like that.
How does that work? Because normally in MMORPGs you have raids and stuff like that, where you have to be a couple of people to be able to beat the enemies and beat the boss. I mean, what is different in Final Fantasy XIV that made you be able to play solo in this way that you're describing?
Yeah, I started it solo. Then, of course, I came into a guild. It's called a free company in Final Fantasy XIV, but it's basically a guild. And started to play with them more, but I was never on like voice chat until 3 years later, and so on. So I had to warm up for that kind of stuff. But I think it's just the simplicity of it, that you follow the story. That is very intriguing, and do the things you need to do for just playing this game. And the only times you really need to play with others is, of course, when you go into a dungeon or when there's like a boss fight. And you usually only have, for those, you only play 4 players or 8 players, and you queue into that. So it's very easy to just queue into it and play with randoms, and you don't have to interact really to get through it in that sense. It's still fun in that way. It feels like you have your party members, but they are played by other people, and you don't know who they are. But that's kind of how it feels like. And then, of course, if you want to go to the bigger raids with 16 people or more, then you have to maybe, especially in the beginnings, while you're still hard and you're not overgeared or overleveled or whatever. It's easy.
You mentioned before the Final Fantasy aesthetics. What is that? Could you describe that? A lot of people talk about that, but what is it? Could you put words on that? What is Final Fantasy aesthetics?
So how do you say it? Like, the Studio Ghibli movies, they certainly have an aesthetic.
Yeah.
But it's hard to point your finger on exactly how you would describe that aesthetic. And I feel the kind of same way with the whole Final Fantasy series. It certainly has its aesthetic that goes through the whole game, all of the games in some way. There's some red threads through the aesthetics, even if they put the game in the future or in the whatever. There's always this aesthetic that is kind of hard to figure out. But I think it is this, like, obviously there's always some kind of medieval fantasy to it, even if it's never medieval, in the sense that there's always going to be swords, even if that sword is also a gun. And it's a sword gun, I don't know,
and it's always big.
It's always big. Yeah, but it's, I guess, the Japanese more anime manga leaning into that, even if they're not fully that always, like they meet that with some realism as well. They're not like cell shaded usually, but they play around with that. And then there's the aesthetic of the lore that is usually a very grand adventure. I certainly feel like I remember from playing lots of board games, Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of stuff. I don't know, it's this grand epic adventure vibe that doesn't necessarily is a Western touch on it. I guess it's the Japanese touch on that. That makes it feel like this aesthetics feel unique. So it's not just knights and the bird, like it's not just the the berserker or the dwarf or the whatever, the elf, the classic fantasy would maybe think of over here. it has its own those kind of things.
The Western European Tolkien, Lord of the Rings kind of description of how
influence,
the influence and how the world works. The unusual thing about Final Fantasy XIV, I mean, in this show, is that it's still around. Of course, all games are still around, but it's an online game and it's still around. You can still play it, of course. Do you still play it?
Yeah, I still play it, but I play it mostly a lot when a new expansion comes out, and then I kind of stop playing it for half a year until the next expansion comes out. I don't really play it as much in between expansions.
But
basically,
since the game has been around for 7 years now, I bet that you can still feel nostalgic about what the game was when it was released in 2013. Is it very different now, 7 years later, or what can you say about the transition from the original game, so to speak, before all the expansions? What are you exactly nostalgic about when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV?
I mean, they've done a lot of changes, and all of those changes are pretty good. It's very good. Yeah, they made it easier for people to catch up and so on.
Okay.
And they made it even easier now to only play it as a single player game if you want to, because now you can play with the NPCs and go into dungeons with them as party members, and they will talk about story bits. So you don't even have to play the dungeons anymore with other players if you don't want to.
Okay.
So now you can play it truly as a just normal Final Fantasy almost, the whole thing, and that you couldn't do before. But the nostalgic part of it is, I think, is like, even if the new expansions have these new worlds and the new always new stuff in it, and new, of course, land areas and new places to explore, you always go back to the old ones as well quite many times. Of course, because they want that all players should be around for the new players.
Right, of course.
that arrive in those areas. So there's a lot of story going on there as well in the new expansions. And I guess this sense of wonder, I feel very nostalgic about just stuff that we did. Like, I remember walking from one area. I met some person, I don't know who it was, but I met some person and we walked the entire way from one city to another and just explored that part. You could actually take like a big blimp or whatever you call it, the Zeppelin
blimp. The blimp.
To that city, to that city. But instead of doing that, I hadn't got that far in the game yet, so I hadn't unlocked that way. And this person wanted, so like, let's go on an adventure, kind of.
Let's walk.
And we just walked. Let's walk. And there was this moment where I just stopped. I said, like, wrote, like, stop. And we stopped. I have to listen to the music. I was just standing there.
Wait.
And I haven't done that since I was a kid, kind of just standing still in a game and just wanted to enjoy the music. So for me, I haven't had that feeling since I was a kid, and that was when I was a kid. That was with Final Fantasy XII and the earlier Final Fantasy games, and for me that was like the decision of why I wanted to become a composer. So it was a very big thing for me. And then so many years later now, like, okay, so here's suddenly a new game that makes me stop and just wanting to, not even play, I just wanted to listen.
So Final Fantasy XIV is the game that actually made you a composer?
Final Fantasy XIV, rather.
Elvira, thank you so much for coming here, being with us and telling about yourself, about Final Fantasy XIV, and above all, about how to make good gaming music. Thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me be here. This was fun.
It was fun, and if you want to listen to more of Elvira's music, you just head to Two Feathers Studio, the webpage, or you can be one of the 600 million people who have downloaded Angry Birds 2. What was it?
Yeah, I think, I don't know anymore, but I think it's
Several
over
millions.
600 million.
600 million. Okay, you can listen to their music anywhere on their webpage. So, thank you so much, Elvira, and good luck with everything, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye!
Yeah.